let's get y'all's raw reaction. First big news story of the day is Asmongold canceled. That's the note that I put out there. But the TLDR, Asmon had a viral clip that just went all across Twitter, basically breaking down the concept of what consumerism is and how gamers buy media. And ultimately, it boils down to, he said, if the game's fun, people are going to buy it. And if you feel like, there's some kind of moral quandary there, time and time again, the sales are just absolutely through. But a lot of artists took offense to this because talking about generative AI coming in and making art, feeling like he was like dunking on them or being diminished. And then he ended up putting out a 2-hour video talking about it. And then they were kind of memeing on him for that. But generative AI and consumerism, obviously Asmon's not canceled.
Yeah. I mean, so having watched a lot of his stuff, I mean, he's a guy where sometimes I agree really firmly with what he says, sometimes I don't. What I'll say in that case is, like, I don't like the fact that what he's saying is correct, but he's not exactly wrong. Like, and I feel like that's the thing, is divorcing him stating that. Like, sometimes he says stuff like that and he's like, and that's perfectly fine and I don't give a shit. But sometimes he says that just because, I mean, whether you like it or not, that is a reality. So if you want it to be different, you gotta just expecting morality being the only driving force of consumerism it's not gonna work. It's not gonna be effective. So I'm not surprised, and I'm also not surprised that a lot of people reacted. This is not the first time he's said something like that or done something like that and people have reacted, and it's, his viewership doesn't give a shit.
He was the most viewed coverage of the Johnny Depp trial.
Yeah, right. Like,
I don't think originally made gold making guides for World of Warcraft was the #1 place to watch Johnny Depp in a lawsuit where somebody pooped on a bed.
Oh my gosh.
That's a reality we live in.
How much do you think that cost Aquaman too? Because she's still in that movie, but they diminished her as much as possible. Because I can't get that image out of my head.
I mean, just reshoots alone, you're talking probably somewhere in the ballpark of like 20-50 million. Like, depending on what they needed to reshoot. I mean, but seeing as she was like his love interest, I have to imagine large swaths. So,
yeah. Anyway, so a part of, obviously his take is about how, like, if the game's fun, people are going to buy it, regardless of whether generative AI is used or not. When it comes down to just that concept, are you guys concerned about generative AI in video games, especially as it relates to our next story where we talk about layoffs in the game industry?
I'm concerned about its ethics. I think, like, the thing is, generative AI in theory as a tool, like, to like shrink it down, things like the metahuman thing in Unreal, right? Or like there are, it's not generative AI, but just as an example of, like, it could be a great tool. It could be a very useful tool in optimizing code, in any number of things. I think the problem is that we haven't shaken out, and I don't know how long it's going to take to shake out what the ethics of using it, crediting, and all of that are. And that's specifically what worries me, rather than it as an existing tool.
When the first sewing machines came out, there was a real concern about the ethics of moving to machine-made clothes, where you had one person making what normally would take years for a group of people to make, and they were doing it in days and weeks. And we went through a round of innovations in that space, and some of those innovations were really good, but were rejected because of an ethical quandary, when that same person could have come up with that invention 10 years later and it would have been rejoiced. Timing was everything. We have seen this time and time again. When there's a giant leap forward, it does not immediately replace all humans. It allows a very small subset of humans to become so efficient that they don't need as much help. When we move to self-driving trucks, truck driving is the #1 job in America. More people classify themselves as driver of truck than any other job. And when we move to self-driving trucks, even if at first it's, okay, there's going to be 4 trucks and 1 driver who's going to maybe park them all because they haven't figured out kind of, some of the parking still sounds like that may need at least some oversight, or at least somebody with a clipboard.
ICE travel also for like, and just for the technical side, and their solution they're testing is having, basically, if you think about drone operators, beam into the truck remotely and actually let them handle it. Yeah.
1 driver handling maybe 10 times the cargo, 40 times the cargo. It won't just immediately replace them, but it will take 39 of those truck drivers and put them out of a job over a very small number of years.
Mhm.
We're gonna have the same thing with artists, and the ethics and moral side of it's incredibly interesting, but historically the money side of it has won out under the theory of
Yeah.
we're protecting maybe those 39 truck drivers, but in trade we're providing a better food economy to lower income. In trade we're finding medical supplies are getting there faster, and right, because like
Yeah, you don't
in
have
theory,
the
there's a
human
net-
restrictions.
in
Yeah.
theory there's a net gain somewhere, is at least how we justify it to ourselves. It's usually on a balance sheet.
Entertainment, though, is going to be interesting with that, right? Though, because entertainment is not a necessity in the same way that, I mean, clothing,
This whole
shelter,
George Carlin
food
thing.
is. Yeah, yeah.
Like
Yeah.
that seems way more objectionable to me than somebody augmenting the amount of art assets they can draw.
Yeah.
Right.
The ability to replace like an actor or to bring somebody back from the dead.
Yeah.
Especially George Carlin, like of all people, there's no way, if you've watched any George Carlin, that's like so against everything that he rallied against.
Mhm.
So like
Yeah.
it just feels insulting, almost like this, like the word consent comes to mind. That we're just like making him, we can make him say things he would have never said because he's not
Right.
alive to defend himself.
Right. I mean, the thing I think we just need to create, I feel like we got to get to the point where we figure out the cultural norms on it, right? Like that is the crux, I think, of so much of it, is what is acceptable and respectable with it. And right now we don't know. Right now
what's
it's it's the
enforceable,
Wild West,
Right?
And
With
what's
this-
enforceable?
with,
That's
the,
a
with this
great
Taylor
point,
Swift
yeah.
stuff, where they're generating images of her as if she wasn't wearing clothes. She has all of the power and resources that anybody could have. There is nobody that could deploy more resources. I mean, she had a fan base that basically, I mean, she basically upended the whole music industry. Like she has an immense amount of power within her sphere. And
Everybody knows a Swiftie.
and
Yeah.
you can't, like, so if she can't stop that, what chance do a handful of artists working on a video game have? People who we don't normally hear anything about until something goes terribly wrong. You
Yeah.
know, Blizzard devs and all of that, like the controversy is what we know of them. The average gamer does not directly know a game dev, just statistically. So especially a AAA game dev or somebody that's like a full-time, right? You have a friend that's making a game, you know, like, oh, I know Brian's kind of working on some stuff, but like there just aren't that many game devs for what is a really large population of gamers. So like I don't know what he said, but I just don't know. I don't know that the base summary of what you gave is something that's wildly wrong. Like capitalism,
and that's
make the choice.
whether you like it or not. That's like the thing.
That's
too.
that is
the point.
separate
Like,
from how I feel about the ethics.
Yeah.
There's two kind of things to kind of like, you know, round this topic off before we jump to the next one, because like I think essentially the best critique that I saw online of his clip is that he could have said it more elegantly. And that's, you know, the thing is, right. Like I could say 1,000 things more elegantly, but he didn't say anything that wasn't fundamentally true. And we see this time and time again. Hogwarts Legacy is a great example of, if it's a fun game and all boycotting will do is just promote the game. You just handed them, you know, $200-300 million worth of marketing because of that. Same thing applies with like a good game, generated AI. Oh, we're gonna, you know, no, it's a fun game. People, because us engaged folks, we maybe represent 5% of the market. 95% of the market's quiet, and they're just like, give me a fun game that I can play.
Is the new
Moving on to
FIFA
the
out?
next thing.
The NFL is the number one.
NFL's
the number one grossing sport worldwide professionally by far.
Right.
And like all that. I was watching Comedy Set this morning while I was cleaning up the house. I was listening to a Comedy Set, and he was talking about how with the Kaepernick stuff, he just really, this was an old set. And he goes, with the Kaepernick stuff, he just couldn't watch NFL anymore. And would you believe it? They're having another Super Bowl this year.
Mm-hmm.
And like, there's that's like,
turns out it does, like at the end of the day,
turns out
football.
Turns out like boycotts have to be so strong, and they have to last a very long time, and they have to be very succinct. If we all disagree for 20 different reasons, they fall apart. So you can't just be like, oh, we all dislike Budweiser for different reasons. No, we gotta agree on one actionable correction that they need to take, and we need to make it very clear that that's what we want. And if they give it to us, there needs to be a correction. And like that just doesn't happen. I just don't see how in gaming we don't see mass layoffs become the trend. I mean, they are the sowers, and this is the sowing machine. That's what's happening.
I will say on the Asmongold, I do think there are times, it's kind of interesting. There are times where he is incredibly empathetic with his points. Like, he gets it and then conveys that he also gets why people may be upset by it, even if it's, but still saying it like it is.
Mm-hmm.
But other times he will just be blunt to a degree that's like confusing, confounding. It's like sometimes that dude is like is bizarre. He'll say that he'll just be like sometimes incredibly almost sociopathically uncaring, and then other times he's incredibly empathetic. So I do think with this point I can imagine someone being like, okay, you said the point, but maybe at least some empathy towards the people affected by that reality goes a long way, you know?
I mean,
it's hard to be empathetic.
Baldur's Gate 3 is the guy that is working on the railroad against the machine. Like, that's the old story, right? Baldur's Gate 3 is the answer. Baldur's Gate 3 is, this is what happens when devs stick to their guns. Now, there are a lot of Baldur's Gate 3 equivalent projects that failed, but that one is the shining star of why we still need hard work and game devs that aren't cutting corners. They're not focused on microtransactions. All the art assets, and it was like over 1 million lines of actual audio dialogue. I don't think any of that was AI generated. I could be wrong. But like, I believe that was just a painstaking game built out
labor of love. Yeah.
Labor of love.
Because the entire market is like the question, like, look, I want, if in my perfect world, everything would be like what Larian's doing, not like genre wise, but like the work wise. The question is can the gaming market even sustain that, right? Because the thing is that game was in development for what, better part of 5 years, sustained through a like passionate fan base following it. Like the money made sense because they could make it make sense. But if every game was doing that same model, would it even work? And I have to imagine it can't. Yeah.
Baldur's Gate 3 was like, why aren't we all doing this? And it's like, because the entire industry would get 2 games a year.
Yeah.
Instead, we're going to get
AI could end up solving that.
2,000 this year. Yeah. There could be 5,000 new games that come out this year. Like,
I would
categorize a game as something that's downloaded by, let's say, 10,000 people. Something that's like clearly beyond like a niche community. Like,
well, and the
10,000 people in a single Discord. And
the thing with
thousands of games.
With Baldur's Gate 3, the other thing that I think a lot of people miss too is that it's not like Baldur's Gate 3 wasn't just the devs cared. It wasn't just they took their time. It was like you have to have good leadership. The money has to be there. You have to have a passionate workforce. You have to have a creative workforce. You have to have like a good idea that actually works, because sometimes great ideas turn out to just not work very well and you're back to square one. And like, so it's like it's more than just any one of these factors, right? And so I think like, I remember back when there were some people, like some devs were frustrated with Baldur's Gate being seen at like, this is just how games need to be. Because like, on the one hand, I get why consumers were like, well, no, no, this is a good standard. We should set the standard. But there were some devs, not all of them by a long shot, but there were some devs that were making a good point more just about like, this isn't, the reason Baldur's Gate ended up as good as it did is for more complicated reasons than it's being made out to seem at times, you know?
So I went to school for architecture.
Yeah.
So my degrees in both of them. And we were taught that to build good architecture, true great architecture that is of its time and is therefore timeless, the things that we hold up as the examples of what we all should all strive for, that it takes a good architect. And so we're all like, that's going to be me. I'm going to be amazing. And a good client. Because if there is not the right money and support and idea behind it, the architect has nothing to work with. And a good site. There has to be good constraints. If you have a city that won't let you build it, if you have a site that has certain requirements, if the material's available in that time, like the actual physical limitations, doesn't matter what you and the client want, there are just physical limitations, which in this space would be things like the hardware of its time. There were games that came out in the 90s that maybe would have failed, and those same ideas could be wildly successful today because hardware is a real limitation. We talk about it with 14 all the time. They just run out of memory. So it's not about do they have the ideas and do they have Square Enix's support and do the gamers want it. It's just physically not possible. And you have to have all of them, and they have to all be going off simultaneously. Like Elio said, like if you drop any of those legs, the whole thing falls over. So I know we're focused on how the artists are affected by the AI, and the difference between the AI and the sewing machine is the sewing machine at no point was taking other people's stuff that was sewn and
learning
them.
A little bit different.
This is taking art from the very artist it's putting out of a job and learning from that art And by learning, sometimes it's just reusing.
The problem with that, though, is that all of us have been giving these companies and agreeing to the terms all of the art and assets and images for over the last like 15, 20 years as this medium comes out. But the solution in my mind, because I actually agree, is that if these machines have been trained up on, and you are included, if they can come up with a way, like some kind of level, a law of an ownership of the data, that it's like, hey, this is your data, it was used to train this stuff. And then as that gets sold and resold, guess what? Here's your cut. You know, here's your take of that. That's the only time of a solution that I could see working, because at the end of the day, like, I can't right now fathom another solution that is both market and, you know, demand appropriate. Otherwise it's like, well, just don't use AI. And it's like, I think people were going to find ways to use AI and maybe not report it.
It's just not going to work. Like saying just don't use an innovative tool that is going to, what you're going to have is there are going to be people who, for lack of a better word, will be Luddites about it and to be like, no, I'm not going to use it. And the world's just going to move on. Like it's what happens. It's what happens.
My dad went to school for engineering.
Computers.
And told me when I was a kid that the internet was a fad and we didn't need it in the house.
Your dad apparently was also in charge of Nintendo at the time, I believe.
So, you know, like that's a real thing. There's a Malcolm Gladwell book that talks about kind of the importance of when you're born. And what you just suggested, Brian, will work in the short term, but what will happen is 50 years from now, there's going to be a bunch of billionaires who were the first people who learned how to acquire and patent the data that fuels the AI of 2080. And in 2028 to 2030, which means they need to be young enough to be in the space and taking risks. They need to be old enough to have the resources that when they see the risks, they can go pay for the rights and whatever. So they are likely teenagers right now, because if they're not born yet, they're going to be too late. The rights will have already been claimed. If they're our age, they'll be too busy on like, I could stay up late and try to acquire that stuff, but I'm going to spend time with my kids. I'm going to keep working on my job I already have because I have a mortgage to pay. So there's this group between teenagers and maybe 25 years old that you need to be in that range right at the time that the flags can be placed. And then once you place them, that's how you get a Bill Gates. That's how you get like there were other people like Bill Gates born 10 years earlier and 10 years later, and we don't have any idea who they are. He was the right person, but he was the right person who was also born at exactly the right time. Yeah. And it's shocking how many people that are instrumental to what we think of as the backbones of the internet, the backbones of modern OSs and all those, even if you do go research other names, they're all born within like the same 2 calendar years. It's wild because it was the right time. So what you're suggesting sounds like a great solution. And if it does become like it sounds great, but if we implement it, what it's going to result in is it's going to be the first people that figure out how to monopolize it will become the world's first trillionaires.
Deck of billionaires. Yeah.
And then that'll be it. And they'll be the Microsoft of 2080, like the world's largest company.
Yeah. And to just kind of bring this back to 14 a little bit, on your original point about requiring an architect at clients and landscape, kind of what you're saying about architects, everyone thinks that they're going to be the OCP, right? It turns out not everyone's the OCP. You know, not everyone's has the skill set to be able to lead. Because it's not just you need a great idea and a great work ethic. You also need to be able to lead your crew. You need to have the experience to know how to make sure that time is used correctly. It's many skills are required to do it well. Yeah.
Now, as we transition into kind of our main topic, because we did talk a little bit about the layoffs, and obviously our sympathy goes out. I do struggle when I see people say empathetic, because like I don't know personally anybody that was laid off. I do like layoffs suck, but like I can't feel like, you know, like they feel. So I always like when people, I think people confuse the term empathy and sympathy, but that's my opinion. But still, we're going to see that, you know, throughout this year. This year alone, it's already got record layoffs. And what I tend to see is people say record profits, record layoffs. But I know that being in the business world, it's not as clear cut. It's, you know, like profits don't necessarily mean that your job is always going to be safe. And I do always try to like focus it on the truth of all of this is that your job is not safe. Don't let these companies market to you, because I think a big part of the problem, especially with the bigger companies like Microsoft and Google and even Twitter to an extent before the takeover, is that hey, we're a community. Like, you know, we have all these services. We'll do your laundry. Like, this is your community. We're a family. Whenever a company,
I mean, it's the word family.
We're a family.
Yeah,
I'm like,
family.
bullshit.
Yeah.
Like, come on. Like,
Well, when fast food companies do that shit too, it's particularly hilarious. Like I worked for like Raising Cane's like 10 years ago or something, and they're like, "We're family." I'm like, "You
No, you're
pay
not.
me minimum wage to fry chicken. Shut up."
and you can't fire your brother. Like, you
Yeah,
know, you
yeah.
might not like sitting at him at next to Thanksgiving, but you can't fire your brother. You could be like,
Yeah.
get out of here, lay off. We changed directions for the company. Oh, I'm so sorry. Like, it's like, that is in and of itself, I think, is one of the things that I'm like, if anything good ever comes out of this, educate yourself and prepare to be laid off at any point. So that way it's not actually a bad day. You get your severance package, hopefully, and take a little holiday. Now, I do want to say thank you so much, Real Kitty Hawk, aka Wes, for his tier 3 sub of support over on the Twitch side of things. 53 months of support. A freaking legend. We cannot do this show without you guys. Also, I got some plans this year for some exclusive member content right here on Work to Game. And Chris has been working on some big videos that hopefully you'll be able to see. But now we get to sit down and talk some Final Fantasy.